I'm very pleased to bring my friend Jim Durbin from Marion, Iowa, a member of the Cedar Rapids Audubon Society up there, who is a fantastic photographer, great birder, and has been working on insects of Iowa. And so I'm going to now have him come up and present his program. Thanks very much, guys.
A couple things I wanted to mention is that I started this, probably early 90s of documenting insects. And I always blame my buddy Frank Olson for doing it to me. Frank's a big birder or big butterfly guy, and he did moths for a long time until about 2 years ago, after he hit his third deer coming home, he decided to quit going out at night. So he's not doing it anymore. The other thing, I had my first website. I started in 2007 after Ann Johnson told me the bug guys needed a website, which I tried to do it all in HTML and cross-link everything, and it was bad. It worked, but it wasn't very easy to maintain. And then in 2012, I met a guy. Wife and I had got back from Jekyll Island in October, and I found this little frog in my battery case on my camper. And so I was looking for some place for him to overwinter, and that's how I met Don, who put my current website together for me, which is data-based, which means it creates the pages on the fly as you pick whatever species you want to look at, and it's got graphs and every other thing on it. So it's just a lot more user-friendly and easier to use. One thing I found over the years is that plants and insects can have the same scientific name. I didn't realize that until I ran into it with the lead plant and a walnut sphinx moth have the same scientific name. And apparently you can do that as long as it's in different classes, or I'm not sure how high up you have to go in the taxonomy to do it. So if you happen to look up something sometime and something else shows up other than what you think, check, because it may be the same scientific name, but it might be a bird or something else, whatever. So that's just a couple things I've learned over the years. I guess that's most of it. This particular moth that's on the front page here, or the front first slide, is one I found at 3 places in Iowa now. It's a little orange moth. It's probably maybe 3/4 an inch across on its wingspan. And I found it I haven't found it at all of them, but Mark Brown found it at Eddyville Sand Prairie, and I found it at Watauga Sand Prairie and Big Sand Mound. So apparently it likes sand prairies, but unfortunately there's not anything known about its phenology or life cycle or anything, so we can only guess at what it is. So, but it's interesting that we find some of these things in very specific habitats, and then other things you just find them everywhere. So the other thing that's been helpful is they invented digital cameras. So since whenever digital cameras came out, I started to doing more pictures of the insects coming into the light instead of trying to collect them. Having a collection, which right now mine's about 18,000 specimens, is a lot of work to take care of and takes space, and you got to, pin them and ID them and put labels on them and track them in a database. So photographs are a lot easier to deal with. So I've gone to where I do a lot of photography for the insects and that. So that makes it a whole lot easier to deal with. This is just a couple things. I've got about almost 1,500 people that have submitted records to my website. So it's just not me creating this data. In fact, Mark Brown and Chris Edwards from Iowa City are two of my biggest contributors. And so it's interesting over the years how many people have started submitting to the website and the number of records we've come up with. So the sites thing, I created this thing to where, well, you talked about the two horse farm or whatever. Well, what I do is I put a box around it, and then any records that the GPS coordinates show up inside that box, they all get labeled the same location. Because one of the issues I had on some of the locations, I had about 15 different names for it. So if you wanted to look up records for a certain site, you had to know all the versions. So we created this site function to where anything that's collected inside that has the same locale name. So it makes it easier to look up records if you're looking them up by a location. So just another little interesting thing. And then over to the side, you can kind of see the number of species that we've documented over the years. 2024 is obviously, we're not done yet. So, but so far, it's been a pretty decent year, at least night lighting. Now, I know a lot of the guys have said that they go out in the daytime and they're not seeing many butterflies, but I'm having a pretty good year with the insects that come into the lights at night. And I try to hit probably 10 different locations over the summer, and hit each one, every couple weeks or so. That way I kind of get an idea of what's coming in over time. And I try to photograph most things that come into the sheet. I joked about the only thing I don't photograph anymore is park rangers and deputy sheriffs that show up. And they just prefer you don't take their pictures. But it's interesting. Oh, I've got a thing here coming up. But anyway, just kind of gives you an idea of around 2,000 species that we document every year. And we add I think it's about 300 species a year. So some of the ones we don't see every year. So it's kind of up and down to which ones we see. Just some numbers. I've got about, I don't know, what does it say, 356,000 US records, and insects is a 300,000. So I have a lot of data on the website now that again, not just myself, but all these other people have supplied me. And it's interesting, I've got some where it may be a single record, and then some like Chris and Mark, they've supplied thousands of records to me. So it's just interesting how you go through some of that where it's one person, they see something and submit it, and others, they do it every year for all their butterfly and insect photography they do. Just, this is kind of a bunch, but I've got about 300,000 records for Iowa, and that covers about 380 families, 2,600 genera, and 5,500 species that we've documented in Iowa right now for insects. There's kind of a breakdown of all of them, but it's a lot of numbers, but it's a lot of bugs. And on that subject, all bugs are insects, but not all insects are bugs. I don't know if you've ever heard that, but there is one order, Hemiptera. It's the things like cicadas, leafhoppers, the assassin bugs, and that. They are considered true bugs, and everything else is considered insects. So the names are kind of used interchangeably, but it's the old, one is one, but maybe not the other. Like I said, just a lot of numbers, but we've just been really lucky over the years to document a lot of different things. This is kind of what my process is, I go out and set up the lights, and I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. I photograph the insects, and this is developed over the years. Like I said, originally I was collecting and whatever, now I just photograph. So when I get home, I put the photographs on a computer and I rename them with the date and location of where I took them. So that way I can always know where I took them and what the date was. Then I run them through either a cropping program or Lightroom and crop them down to 6 by 6 inches by 100 DPI. And that works well on the website. They're not too large and take up a lot of room, but they will show up when you click on them and give you a nice view of the insect. And again, the cropping program is one my buddy made, so it saves me a lot of time cropping images. Then I go into Lightroom, and you can add GPS coordinates to the file name of the photograph. And so now I've got the, well, the camera puts the time and date on it to start with. And then I go in and add the GPS coordinates. Then I add the photographs through the identification program, and it'll add the identification of what it thinks it is to the file name. And then after I do that, then I go to Bug Guide and Moth Photographers Group, and I check the identification that the program has come up with. So I always double check it, but I used to spend most of the winter IDing a lot of these things, and now after a night of mothing about 3 days, and I've got most of it, except for maybe a couple specimens, ID'd and actually loaded up to the website. So my time frame is drastically changed over the years. And then I upload the photographs to the website, and then I have a thing that will go in and create bulk records. So I may put in 1,000 pictures and tell it some of the data and whatever, and hit go. In about maybe 10 seconds, it'll convert them all into records. So again, instead of taking a day or two, it takes seconds now. So all this is a lot of time saving, and then I can go do other things. One of the things I have done on the website is if you go to any species page, you'll see down below there's a link to Bug Guide, Moth Photographers Group, maybe iNaturalist, maybe Butterflies of America, different places where you can go find more information on the insect, the species itself. I was conversing with the lady at Moth Photographers Group, and she goes, yeah, we don't go in and put a lot of the data on our website. We just link you to these other ones, and then we don't have to deal with all that. And links are really easy to put in. And then, like I said at the bottom, repeat in a couple days. Do it again. This is the setup I currently use. I used to start it out with a rope and sheet hanging between two trees with a small fluorescent light that was running off of like a motorcycle battery. Currently, I made this, I had the frame and I was still using the sheet. One of the problems is that the sheet moves if there's any breeze. So I actually went to 1/4-inch plywood, and then I hang it on the frame, which is just out of electrical conduit and fittings. And that way it doesn't move when I'm trying to take pictures of some of these guys that are, they're 1/8 of an inch or something. And so you don't have much depth of field. And if they move, they're out of focus or gone. So this works real well from that standpoint of if there's any breeze or anything, I don't have to worry about the sheet moving or whatever now. This set's about 12 inches off the ground. I found as I got more mature that it was harder to get up and down off of the ground. So this way I can actually just set my chair there and take a lot of the pictures of the stuff that's on the lower part of the board and that. Plus the one on the bottom, a lot of the things will land on that and just sit there. So again, I'm not actually getting up and down off the ground, which can be difficult some days. This other picture, I was doing a program for a scout troop at Pennington Ridge. I do some night lighting up there, and they were going to be up there doing a camp out one weekend. So they walked over to where I was doing my night lighting and got to see what I do in the dark at night. And this is a couple pictures a guy that went with me a couple times took. Some nights you sit there a while waiting for the next batch to come in. So some nights I don't sit down very much, and other nights you sit down for 10 minutes and rest and then wait for the next batch to come in. And it's interesting because I turn on the lights about a half an hour after sunset. So this time of year, you can get it on pretty early, but in June, I mean, it might be 9:30 before I can get it on. So the time I get there and leave changes dramatically depending on the time of the year. So, 11 o'clock now is pretty late. 11 o'clock into June is not really late. So, but anyway, that's just, sometimes you sit and relax and wait. These three moths are all ones that migrate to Iowa sometime during the summer usually. The black witch, we get about, 3 or 4 of those that migrate up from the south every year. People will see them around their house or whatever, take pictures and send them into the website. The Titan Sphinx moth, we probably only get those about every 5 years. And this year, luckily, we had one lady took pictures of it. It was on some flower she had off of her porch and got pictures of it. And so she turned it in. And then the one down below, I think it's called the Gaudy Sphinx. Wait, I can see it right here. Gaudy Sphinx. That's the only record we have of it. We have one record for that for the state. And again, somebody just happened to see it with their camera and take pictures. So it's interesting with the cell phones now with better cameras in them, or the cell phones with cameras in them, and they happen to make phone calls. They're just computers, handheld computers. But there's a lot of people actually see a lot of interesting things, and they'll get pictures of them, and then they'll submit them in. So, cameras, the new digital cameras and phones are really nice to have. This is a few little moths that, again, the one that I showed on the front thing, and then some of these others. This top middle one, for years, my photographs were the only one you could find on the internet. And it took me probably a year to get an ID on it. And I finally contacted, I think it was Terry Harrison he's over in Terre Haute, Indiana. And he ID'd it for me. And it was just from a picture in Peterson's moth book. There was a little picture on like the last page of stuff down in the corner, and he goes, I think it's that one. So, and then, I don't know, 5 years later or something, other people actually had photographed it and documented it. It was up on Moth Photographers Group and Bug Guide. So it's interesting how many of these things are undocumented yet. I photographed one at normally found in Southwest U.S. and apparently it's kind of snuck up here somewhere. And then there's another one that has a population in Pella, Iowa now that's actually an introduced species, but it's enough of them have reproduced that it's actually a population there now. So you kind of get, you know, they're not causing any harm, so nobody calls them really an invasive species like the lanternfly that they're having out east or something. But you know, we keep getting some of the things that show up a long way out of the range, and we suspect some of it is the storms we've been having, and then of course things are getting warmer, so they just kind of work their way up. Um, Chris Edwards has found a red-banded hair streak down in around Keokuk area, and it's a southern species, but we've had 3 or 4 records of that now in Lee County. So it's moving its range north a little bit as it gets warmer, so they can survive the winter, I guess, in that. Um, and then these other guys, some of these guys, you know, you're talking about a moth that's a 1/2 inch wingspan and or less. And when you look at them on the I call it sheet, but it's actually the whiteboards. Um, some of them you almost have to photograph them and enlarge them on the camera to actually see what they look like. But but the patterns and the colors on some of these little guys are just, I don't know, they're just incredible. That, you know, a lot of the big ones are kind of brown and there's not much pattern to them, but some of these little guys really have a lot of neat colors and patterns to them. And then we get in, these are silk moths. Got the imperial, the luna, the honey locust. It's a little different in that it has a spring and a fall version. The I don't remember which way. The other version tends to be more orangey and not kind of grayish like this one is, but it has the spots in that. So it's, you pretty sure what it is when you see it, other than it's just a different coloration. Then the Cecropia, which is one of our bigger moths that we have, Promethea. These guys used black cherry mainly as their host plant, so you pretty much have to find cherry trees, and they don't come to lights very often. So you almost have to go out and find the cocoons hanging in the fall to know they're around. But then that's an easy way to tell they are, because their cocoon is very distinctive. It's tied on a kind of like a string, and then it hangs down, versus like the Cecropia actually will make its cocoon where it's wrapped around the limb and won't fall off. Lunas is, they're kind of different. In fact, they make their cocoon, but in the fall, they'll fall off the tree and they'll be down in the leaves and that on the ground. So it's amazing. Each one of these things has its own way of surviving. And then the rosy maple moth is another one that's kind of cool that comes in. And then we get into the sphinx moths. These guys are the ones that a lot of people call hummingbirds, moths, but I've got a couple calls from people and go, I don't know. I just went out tonight and I must have had 15 hummingbirds around my plants right at dusk. Dead giveaway. If they say dusk, then you know it's probably white line sphinx. And I don't think I even put one of them on here, but it looks kind of similar to the banded sphinx up here. But white line sphinx is probably the most common that people see in their gardens, and they'll see them right at dusk, and you know they'll be flying around, and these guys nectar kind of like hummingbirds do. But it's interesting, and the way I kind of got started into this, I went out to Rock Island Preserve, and Frank was doing a presentation. Well, doing a not presentation, but him and Keith Erickson were out there, and you know they invited people to come out, and they were actually catching sphinx moths that were coming into the bouncing bed. They'd catch them in a jar and then show us what they were doing in that. But it's interesting, if you find a good patch of bouncing bet, a lot of times you can go out in probably mid to end July and take you a light and shine it around, and you can see the eyes on the moths, and you know they're busy doing whatever, and usually you can catch them with the net or whatever, and then you can photograph them or whatever you want to do. So it's just another interesting way to collect data on these things. These are in the Aribidae family. You end up with the underwings, and I probably, well, oh, anyway, the you can see the difference in some of them have just the black underwing, and then the one below it has the stripy pattern. And what's interesting, a lot of times these guys will land on the side of a tree, and if their wings are folded up, you can't really, they're hard to see. And so what happens a lot of times, a bird or something will come along and land next to them. Well, they'll flash their hind wings and then fly off and land on the tree and close them up, and then they're kind of invisible. They tend to startle over there, and then they go hide on another tree. So it's um, the tiger moths have a really nice. A lot of them have this reddish pattern in them. Most of them have the spots on the hind wings. They're and one of the interesting things about some of the insects is you have to actually dissect them, the genitalia, to decide what they are. There's 4 species of tiger moth. Supposedly, you can't tell apart unless you do that. So on my website, if you happen to look up something and the species has a name, a dash, another name, or whatever, I dashed the species names together because there's no real way to tell them apart unless you actually get them under a microscope or whatever and dissect the genitalia to tell them apart. So I lump them all together. Then the herald moth, and then the zales. There's, I think, 15 different species of zale moths that we have that have various patterns. And then the hypenas is another one. There's about, I think, 10 species of those that various patterns in that. Flies. We have lots of flies and lots of different shapes and colors. I especially like the one in the bottom middle and this eyes on sticking out of its head. And then the one on the bottom center, it has kind of a snout on its head. And they're fairly common. I get them on my deck all the time, so I'm out there trying to get pictures of them. But it's just, and then you've got the Lapria that look like bees, and then the golden back, and then this is a botfly, and then you have the bathroom mothfly. A lot of times, if you're in the restrooms out in the parks and that, these will be all over the walls. They're real. I mean, they're only about maybe a quarter inch, but they're fairly common. They like, I guess they live in the drain. So I kind of picked about 6 species out of each order to show you because it's hard to show you 5,000 species. Coleoptera, we have a lot of different. The top one is a Cerambycidae, which is a longhorn beetle. The one on the right is called a caterpillar hunter. And there's kind of a story. My daughter collected a bunch of caterpillars one day, and then we night lighted that night and caught one of these guys, and she put it in with her caterpillars and got home, and some of her caterpillars were missing. And then she finally figured out what this was and goes, that was kind of dumb. So, but she didn't realize it was a caterpillar hunter. So, and then you get some of the bottom middle is a Cerambycidae, or not, it's a scarab beetle. And so, you get all the different patterns and shapes. Can't remember how many, there's probably a couple hundred of the longhorn beetles in Iowa. Marlin rice and Doug Veal, who are both beetle people, they're hopefully going to put a paper out here one of these days describing all the ones we have in Iowa. A few more of the beetles. The top right is one of the um, um, carrion beetles. And then there's just, all different shapes. And I especially like the one like in the bottom right or left that has the feathery kind of antennas on them. They're just, and again, you get into the snout beetles, weevils. And I was nice tonight. I didn't include my weevil joke, but I'll tell you about it someday. The upper left, these are Hymenoptera, which is the bees and wasp in that. That guy is a poison ivy sawfly. And we were at Big Sand Mound this spring in June looking for a certain longhorn beetle there. And it was interesting. We had the sawfly, we had the longhorn beetle, and then there was one other species we had, and they all looked very similar. You had to get pretty close to figure out which one it was until you kind of could tell them apart. But we had three species that were almost identical. They had this black wings and the red bodies in that. And so it's interesting how much mimicry, I guess you'd call it, there is in the insect world. And again, there's just all kinds. The rusty patch bumblebee is the upper middle. It looks like it's in a glass container, which it is. I found one of these in my front yard one day, collected it because I didn't know what it was. So I put it in that container, took pictures of it, and put it on the insect serve. And about 20 minutes later, I got these replies back, and one of them was from a fish and wildlife lady up in Michigan or Minnesota. And she goes, "This is endangered, and we would prefer you didn't collect them." And I go, "I didn't collect him. I just took pictures and let him go." So, but it's interesting where people are finding a lot of this species in their home gardens. They're I think gone out of about 80% of their range now, further east. And so they seemed, and it's interesting, we looked at a lot of the sightings we have for Iowa, and they seem to be close to river corridors. And we don't know if they're using those to travel or if it's a fact that that's where the only vegetation is anymore. So again, to your bond issue, protect those green areas. Dragonflies. I used to do a lot of dragonflies, but I don't do much of that anymore. As somebody says, I've gone to the dark side and only seem to get out at night. But the upper right, the heroes, that one's an interesting because we don't have many records for it in Iowa, but for some reason, about every 5 years, one shows up in my backyard, and it'll hang out for a while and lay eggs in my little pond I have, and then it disappears. And like I said, I see it about once every 5 years, and if I'm lucky, I can get pictures of it or whatever. So, but again, and like most insects, dragonflies and all these others tend to have certain habitats you'll find them in. The dragonflies tend to be around water, but you won't necessarily find them in water. They only use the water to lay eggs and for their nymphal stage. And then other than that, they're out flying around wherever they can to find food. The other interesting thing is that in September, about this time of year, you'll probably see large swarms of these, of mainly the green darners, Anax junius, that are migrating. They're one of the few that migrate. And typically when you see those migrating, the big swarms, you'll see big swarms of nighthawks and other birds feeding on them. So, it's like a smorgasbord in the air. Leaf hoppers, these are your true bugs. The upper left one, a friend of mine, he goes, that's a dragon bug, because the face of it kind of looks like some of the Chinese dragon things that you see. But, again, these are all different true bugs. The one, the upper right, it's one of the assassin bugs, and they have a big sharp proboscis that they stick into the plant stems and suck juices out of. Some of the others do some of that, but like the leaf hoppers and that, they just bite into it and suck the juice out. Again, there's just, all kinds of colors, shapes. The little lace bugs down in the bottom left corner are kind of cool. But it's just interesting, all the different species and colors and shapes of these things that you see when you're out there. Butterflies, regal fritillary in the upper left corner. I should have put the other name on them. The bottom right here is a southern dogface. That's one that migrates up to Iowa during the year. We think there's some nesting or some populations that are here, but they tend to migrate up, but we don't think they migrate back. The bisa skipper, it's in big trouble. Don't know if it's going to make it. We can't hardly find them anymore. And then Chris Edwards found this Ocala skipper, the bottom left corner, down in Keokuk, or down in Louisa, I think it was, or Keokuk County, or Lee County at Port Louisa. It's a skipper that's normally found in Florida. Have no idea how he found his way to Iowa, but again, these things kind of tend to move around. And then the zebra swallowtail, it's another one we used to only find those out at Waubonsee State Park in southwest Iowa because it has pawpaws. And it uses pawpaws as its food source, but people are planting pawpaws around, and somehow the swallowtails are finding them. There's a place even here in Johnson County where there's a big thing of pawpaws, and apparently it's loaded with the zebra swallowtails. Can't remember the name of it, but again, it's just one of the things, and this is a map that shows all the sites I have records for around, and you can kind of tell where Iowa is. And then this is kind of an exploded view, but one of the things you can do if you go to the sites thing up at the top of the menu item up there, you can click on the sites, you can go down and you get the map and you enlarge it out, and you'll see little squares. And if you click on the square, it'll actually take you in and show you a Google map of what it looks like. And you can actually click on it. There's another one that says data, and you can click on that and it'll show you all the records for the site. So it's kind of different ways to get in and see all the data in that. And that's all I have. Okay.
So if somebody wanted to come out on a night when you're doing your night lighting, do you advertise, or do you just do it with like at Indian Creek or something like that where people could know
people are welcome to come out, and if enough, send me an email and say, I'd like to go out with you some night, and then I can let you know when I would be going out next. This year I did a thing at Draco Hill, at Sugar Bottoms, at Kent Park, and at Palisades, in a couple of them, the campgrounds. We set up nights for people to come out, but I usually do one at Kent Park every year. It's kind of the end of July. They have their moth week thing. And so I'm usually there, but if you're interested in going out with me sometime, just send me an email, and it's on the website insectsofiowa.org. Send me an email and we'll see if we can't get you out some night.
Or we could set it up on a event,
That too.
right, Linda? Sure, sure, sure. We did chimney swifts. I mean, you know.
Well,
And
the only thing is, if you do it, I would recommend doing it in maybe August or September, because it gets dark earlier.
yeah, it's easier to do.
You know, it's easier to do. It's, you don't have to be up so late. That's one of the issues if people have families and we try to set one up in June or July. You know, it's 9 o'clock before you can even get started, and
Right.
you know, it's bedtime for the kids
Right.
and
Right.
some of the adults.
I've been out several times with you over the years, and it's always fascinating.
Yeah.
It's always fascinating. Do we have any questions on the Zoom?
Yes.
A question about quality of the lights that you use. We, this year, installed a new porch light that's LED. There are very few pixels that come around that light. Very, very few.
I'm not sure what kind of LED you have, but I have LED fluorescent lights. They're the 4-footers to replace fluorescent bulbs. And I use them. And then I also use a 4-foot black light that's fluorescent. And so I get a lot of stuff in. One of the issues we have is that a lot of people are finding out in towns and that where there's a lot of spraying, they just aren't getting insects anymore. And it's not just in towns either, but you know, if we talk about the windshield effect, that if you're driving around at night anymore, lots of times you don't get many bugs on the windshield like you used to when we were younger.
Well, yeah, in the 60s and 70s, the windshield would be just
Covered.
a mess.
Yeah. And now you have to go out 2 or 3 nights before you even get a half dozen things on your windshield. So it's an issue with the insects are just not there like they used to be. Yes.
I have a question about you have 3 moth species and 1 butterfly species that are identified by plants they eat on, trees that they feed on. I'm curious about the chinkapin leaf miner, which are they only associated with chinkapin elms?
There's a lot there. I think there's probably like 500 species of insects that use oak trees. Now, I don't know that specific one. There are some that are specific to a certain plant. And then there's others that if it's an oak tree, it's an oak tree, you know, kind of thing. They're generalists and not specific to any one plant. So if I would have to look up a specific one and look up the data for it to find out. But again, some only use one plant. Others use whatever they can find. If it's in the same family, especially. Yeah.
Jim, can I remind you to repeat questions from people present?
Sure.
So we can hear them. Thanks. And Zoomers, if you have questions, remember to unmute yourself. Thanks.
Okay. The question that was asked, just to go back over it, it was about insects using certain plants. And there's some that are very specific to the host plant. And then there's others that'll use like anything in the same family, like oaks or whatever. There's probably 500 species of insects that use oak trees, from, you know, butterflies, moths, you know, beetles, lots of beetles and that. So, okay. Any questions from Zoom?
I've got a question, Jim.
Sure.
The identification software on your website, what's the training sets? Because image recognition requires a training set. And
yes, the question is well, on my website I have a ID program, and we started that in 2018. And the first time we trained it just on moths and the pictures that were on my website. Since then, I went to Bug Guide and a few other places, and I got a list of insects that were listed for Iowa and the surrounding area states. And so the guy that does the software went off and he scrapes the internet for pictures of all these things. And then we put them into the training program, which takes, at least a month to train it every time we retrain it. But I think he said last time there was something like 2 million photographs that he was using for training that he collected off the internet to use for the training. But right now the program is trained for about 12,000 species, and that's birds and plants. Some things are better than others. So, and sometimes you'll put something in and, it might be a plant and it'll tell you it's a snake or a bird, or if it doesn't have anything in the training that's close to it, then you don't know what you're going to get. It'll pick something that's kind of like it, but whatever. I will say one of the things now that Google Lens is getting a lot better than it was like 2 or 3 months ago. Before, it would show you stuff in Asia or Europe and whatever, you didn't care. But I don't know what they did, but now it tends to be more regional. But one of the funny things that's interesting, and I'm not sure how they do it, they must go through websites and look for pictures that are similar to what you're trying to ID on Google Lens. Because a lot of times when I'll put a picture in, Google Lens will come up with that same picture that I'm trying to ID is one of the things it shows you. So it's kind of interesting that I'm not sure how they're doing it now, but at least it tends to be more US stuff. And generally, a lot of times, if I can't get it to species, I can at least get it down to a genus, and then I can go to Bug Guide or one of the other sites and hopefully get it closer. Even on Bug Guide, though, there's a lot of insects that are only down to a genus level, and some maybe even a family. So one of the things I've done on my website, if you, up in the upper right corner, there's a search window. If you put in undetermined, it'll show you all the things I have that are undetermined to species level. And one of the things I've done is, if I can't determine to a species level because Bug Guide doesn't have it to a species level, I put a little -X after the undetermined. That way I know I've already tried to get it down to a species level. Bug Guide doesn't have it. So then I don't worry about going through and looking at it again and again. So did that answer your question, Peter?
Quite a bit, yes. But with Bug Guide and iNaturalist and so forth, often people say the people who are doing the identifying, their credentials and whatnot are often unknown. In fact, Bug Guide always puts a little statement in there to indicate that we can't expect perfection in their own identification.
That's true. There's a lot of the insects you actually have to get down in. Well, the question or the comment was that even the people on Bug Guide sometimes will tell you that it's hard to identify something, and a lot of them you have to actually get them under a microscope in that. So, but one of the things I find interesting anymore is if you train the programs with enough pictures, somehow they can pick out features that our human eye can't.
Oh.
If you look at a spring azure butterfly and a summer azure butterfly, we can't tell the difference. And we kind of say, okay, if you see it after June 1st, it's probably a summer azure. But the program somehow can tell them apart.
Really?
And yeah, it's, I don't know how it does it, but I'm just amazed at how well it will identify insects. And like I said, it's trained for 12,000. And when I run insects through it, if let's just say I put 1,000 pictures in it from a night, which is a really good night, I might only have 10 that I've really got to search to figure out what they are. It's good enough to identify the rest of them without me having to do anything more other than verify that it's the right identification.
Wow.
Any other questions? Yes.
So many insects are becoming harder to find. I'm thinking specifically of one that water striders that used to be ubiquitous when I was young. Every pond, every stream, they were thick. And I haven't seen any for any, 5 or 6 years ago, I found 3 or 4 little ones on my backyard pond. And I haven't, those are the only ones I've seen since.
The comment was that things like water striders and that used to be really common are hard to find now. And I would agree with that statement. And I think some of it has to do the quality of the water that they're in. And the other one is just the fact that there's so much insecticide and pesticides being put out that they're just killing a lot of the insects.
Well, there's drought conditions too.
And drought conditions too.
That have affected a lot of aquatic insects.
Yes.
Do you see them at all, water striders?
I see them every once in a while when I'm out. I see them a lot if you get into like a small creek, stream, where you're seeing some of the damselflies and dragonflies. And a lot of times you'll see striders there. But again, it's a lot of these things are just hard to find anymore. Fireflies, we don't see those very often. Yes.
Are you just getting moths when you're doing the lighting? Or you get all different?
It's anything and everything anymore. Oh, the question was, do I just do moths or do I do lots of other things? In 2018, before I got the ID program, I was pretty much just doing moths and some of the big, fancy beetles that were, like color and stuff on them, or longhorn beetles. But once I got the ID program, so I had a chance to identify them, I started taking pictures of pretty much everything. Yes. We did one at Big Sand Mound August 28th, and Angela Morehouse was there. And between us, I think we documented like 300 species that night. And that was mosquitoes, that was, leaf hoppers, that was moths, beetles. In fact, she took a picture of a mosquito that she didn't see it when she took the picture, but when she looked at the photograph later, it had blue striping on it, iridescent blue striping on it. And from that, she was able to actually ID it because there is a species that's that way. But it's just, like I said, once I got the ID program, I started just documenting anything and everything because I had kind of had an idea I might be able to figure out what it is. But like I said, I went from spending the whole winter IDing stuff that I had photographed to 2 or 3 days. I'm usually got most of them done. So it's, technology and tools are great if used for the right thing.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
General that insects are attracted to the light. I guess I'm thinking, are we missing a whole swath of insects that don't like the light or are running away from the light, that sort of thing, that come out at night otherwise?
The question is, insects coming into the light. There are a lot of them that don't come to the light, and specifically some of the moth species, the underwings. You do a lot better on underwings if you do baiting and you make a mixture of sugar, brown sugar, stale beer, mashed up bananas, and paint it on a tree. The only problem you have to worry about is you don't want to do it around a campus because then the kids are out there licking the trees. I'm kidding, make a joke. But you put that fermented mixture on the trees, and a lot of the underwings and some of the other moths and beetles are attracted to that. So that's a group that typically don't come into the light, so you got to collect them that way. You have to sometimes use pitfall traps. My buddy that's down at Big Sand Mound, they put out pitfall traps for turtles and stuff, and he gets a lot of beetles and stuff in them. They walking along and fall into the trap, and so he catches mice and whatever. So to really cover the whole thing, you got to use about 20 different methods and be there all the time, or you're going to miss something. I mean, it's just we're limited on how much time we can spend there, and limited on the methods we use of what you're probably going to attract in. So you got to use a lot of different methods and be there a lot of time, and
When I took entomology in college, we collected litter, and there's different layers of litter. There's the top, and there's the duff, and and we put that in a big tin can with a mesh underneath, and then the insects would fall out. And those you couldn't collect any other way.
Yeah. And another example of a means of collecting that's difficult is Doug Veal and Marlin go to Yellow Creek Park down by Des Moines, and there's a bee that actually, or wasp, that goes up into the trees and catches a certain beetle and brings them back to their nesting holes to feed the larvae on. And so they hang around in the ball diamonds and see these wasps coming in with these beetles and spook them, and they drop the beetles and they collect them, because the beetles only hang out in the top canopy in the trees. So again, it's just kind of crazy. He told me that, and I'm going, okay, yeah. But there's just, and the other thing is, the more we learn, the less we know, or think we know, because it's just, there's always a new one showing up or whatever, and you stumble across something that, shouldn't be there, but it is. So you just never know. But it's, I've been doing this since probably mid-90s, and we're still, I enjoy going out every time because I know something new is going to show up. I don't know how long
we're good. We're good.
Okay.
If we just don't leave the building because we couldn't get back in.
Okay.
But as long as we're inside, we're good.
Okay.
So
Any more questions from online? What's my favorite bug? I guess.
Is it a true bug now, or is it an insect?
Well, it's one of those, it depends on the time I find it, I guess. I love the longhorn beetles because they're so diverse color-wise, and they just have the long antenna. And, some of them, they may have antenna that are 3 inches long. They're just cool. But then you got your leaf hoppers that are all different colors. You get ones that are this, 1/8 inch, and then you get ones that are 1 inch long, and all different colors and shapes. And it's just, and of course the moths and butterflies are just, I couldn't really pick one. Like I said, it would depend on the day you asked me the question and what I found the night before. It's kind of like birds, it's, what's your favorite bird? Well, I saw a parula today. It was pretty cool, or a wood thrush. So it just kind of depends on the day and what you happen to see, because they're just all cool. I guess that's the way I would look at it. They're all just cool, and the more we can find out about them, and again, the thing that's interesting, this spring down at Big Sand Mound, I was talking about my buddy catching beetles in the trap, but he had one beetle he kept catching in the trap through the month of June, and it's a species that we've only found there. And he found, I don't know how many this year, but they would be in his traps in the morning, and he'd take them out and photograph them and then submit them to the website. And then there was another longhorn beetle. It was kind of like that red and black sawfly I showed you earlier, that it showed up when the prickly pear cactus were starting to bloom, and it disappeared when they were starting to go to fruit. So and he found a lot of the beetles on the prickly pear, but we're not sure what the relationship is yet, because it was the first year we've done this. So next June, we're going to be down there looking for this beetle again. So, we find those kind of things. We go, okay, it shows up in June, and unfortunately, it's only a big sand mound. So it can be hard to get things going there to get in, but he has special permission to be in, and he can take people in to do studies, because they like to know what's there and what new things they can find. So that's helped a lot. But anyway, any other questions?
Do you communicate very much with the entomologists at our state universities?
Some, but not a lot. I kind of do my own thing on my website, and I've got all these people that are sending me stuff to document. I do work with Stephanie Shepard, who's with the Wildlife Diversity Group, with some of the butterflies and that. They're using some of the data to modify their action plans and different things. And we're trying to come up with a couple new graphs and that show some of the data and hopefully we can see some of these insects that were still fairly common that we're not losing, but then maybe see some of the ones that we used to see, but their numbers are going down, kind of thing. So, it's one thing to collect all the data, but it can be hard to try to figure out how to put out the data so it means something. So we're working on some of those kind of methods with some graphs and different ways to do that. But, so I always find it a challenge to come up with something for my programmer to come up with a method for me to use it. Okay. Anything else?
Can you comment on the monarchs at all?
Do what?
The monarch?
Monarchs this year. It seems like people are seeing, a few, but then other times they're not seeing any. So this fall, last year I tried to tag monarchs coming through my yard. And it's interesting because I would go out and catch them, tag them, and I never caught one of them again. So they are apparently just drifting through my yard headed south. And I've been seeing, one or two, maybe three sometimes, some days. Unfortunately, it's hard to kind of guess at the numbers because the hummingbirds keep chasing them off. They'll come in and get on the flower, and the next thing you know, here's a hummingbird, and they're chasing them out of the yard. So we have had quite a few hummingbirds this fall, which is kind of neat. One day I think we had 10 or so, which is a lot for us, but it's just, and I don't know, we had a really good year up until, 1st of September with moisture and that, and everything was green and whatever. And then, it's pretty dry out there right now. A lot of the flowers and that are just drying up, and there's, I don't have a lot in my yard for things to get on anymore other than some butterfly bushes, but and I don't know if other places are the same way, but some of the stuff that would normally be blooming into October is done. It's already gone. So it's hard to keep something blooming in the yard the whole year to attract the things in. So
And there are plants that the insects need as adults, and then there's other plants that they actually want to lay their eggs on for their instars,
Yes,
for the little wormy things.
for the caterpillars and the
Yeah,
larvae.
right.
One may be a food source for the caterpillar, but they need something else for nectar or whatever when they're adults. So
That's right.
it's kind of a how much room do I have to plant what kind of thing. So okay. Any other questions? Okay.
Well, we thank you very much for coming out tonight.